Hi guys, Tony's right. How are you? Okay, so back this up a little bit. There we go. Okay, it feels a little bit better. Okay, so this video is going to be hopefully short. You know how I am. So it's going to be hopefully pretty short. We're going to talk about sending my book off to press to get proofs. So we completed our first kind of half of the semester. Spring break is over, so we're kind of in the last like month and a half of the program of the semester. So my cohort, we, for the most part, all of us sent our books off to print this week. Hopefully everybody sent their stuff off to print. Hopefully everybody was able to set up their files in a way. Hopefully everybody was able to do that stuff. But essentially we're getting our proofs. They're gonna print them, send them to us. If everything's good, it'll be okay. And then we'll go from there. So I'm really excited about that. So I'm gonna just talk about the editing process up until sending it off and kind of like how that went. And talking about the more external editing process when you're talking to other people about your design work or your written work and how that goes. Not just you editing yourself, others editing you. So this editing process has been pretty good, mostly hands off. But there was the initial talk with the professors about your collection, essentially what you wrote coming off of winter break. And there was an editing process in terms of maybe cut these, keep these with severe edits, keep these with minor edits, things like that. So that was more like the overall structure of the book had to kind of be solidified. The title, section titles, for the most part, the poems that you want to keep. And then if you weren't going to keep certain poems, what you were proposing to put in its place. So for me, let's back up. Our collection is kind of like chapbook length. Some people may consider it a full collection depending on how many pages it is. But for us, it was 25 poems. And so that was the minimum that you needed. And the page count really didn't matter, but the poem count did. So some places consider the total number of poems, maybe chapbook 25, right? Because some collections are double that. And then some people may consider us full-length collection based on how long our actual books are. It depends on their specifications and stuff like that. Anyway, so the first parts of the editing process was really more setting the bare bones structure of what you needed in terms of making sure you had enough poems to proceed forward. Because you needed 25, and if you had to edit and hack 20 of them, that's a disaster, because you're literally asking someone to write 20-ish poems and edit the poems that they have. So write 20 more poems, edit it all of them, and go from there. That's a lot of work. So luckily for me, I had substantial edits that I needed for me, because my collection, the title suggestion they gave, I didn't like. The sections I didn't like for their suggestions. So I came up with my own title, I came up with my own sections, and I came up with my own subsections and subsequent editings. And then the poems that I kept were a good amount, but it left me with 7 or 8 poems that I had to like write from scratch. So I had to not only edit the poems that I was going to keep, right, but then also create new poems. For me, that was the better path than keeping a lot of the poems that I had put in there to like submit the first time, because those were filler poems. I just needed to meet the requirement. And I knew that I was going to edit them. And I think as I went through the process of editing, and especially when it came to the sequencing table of content wise, like how your book is structured, that process started to make me fill in the gaps of what I needed, because I'm a very right to concept kind of person. And so once I develop a concept, I start to look for the ways in which it's amplified, it's juxtaposed, it's subversed, like things like that. And I look for ideas to plug in. So I knew that once I started taking out the poems that I considered to be totally like off base or mostly off base, I started plugging in the things, and it, like I said, it helped once I had the structure of how I wanted it to be. So that part, editing was fine. It was more like we needed to just establish what this is. And then the next round of edits have been more like going through the document, reading it, editing the content again, editing the content, rearranging, sequencing, doing all of that. And then towards the end, the final edits are more about like spelling, spacing, grammar, the more nitty gritty things that I think can trip people up, because people may not like your poem, but if it has spelling errors and shit like that, like major grammatical type things going on, I mean, that's all the more reason to hate it, right? So the make or break things. So we did that, a lot of that. So my last day before I submitted it for my proof, the professor read over, gave me a lot of editing things that I needed to work on. So most of mine, I'll get into this, most of mine centered on things like em dash versus hyphen, because to me, I'm used to just putting like the hyphen in there, but em dash is a very specific thing. Hyphen is when you want to hyphenate things. And then the em dash is when there's like a pause and you're like writing. And so it's not the comma kind of pause. It's more like, it's almost like you're having an aside, so to speak, when it comes to talking. And you need that little thing in there. Anyway, so correcting a lot of that. I had the British spelling of mollusk. Had to change it to the American. Just changing and adding those em dashes, editing some lines, editing titles to make sure it's like consistent, making sure that my page numbers were correct, things like that. I had done most of the work of making it as structurally sound as possible. I had thought about rearranging some poems, but then I was like, you know what, let's keep it how it is and just go for it with that. And we'll see. I will say, when it comes to this whole process, we had to edit this. We had to write it, edit it, and design it. So that's the key component of our program that makes it different from a lot of MFA programs, is that we design the book that we wrote. So I literally go in and design, set up the document, set up the bleed, set up the margins, pick the type, font, family, all of that, the size of stuff, the grid, how that looks, my cover, how that looks, the spine, how that looks, write the blurb, put all that stuff together, and I get design feedback on it. So my design feedback was pretty good. Editing wise, I didn't have the skill set really to do a lot of the design stuff that they were suggesting. So for the most part, I kept my design fairly simple with regards, like I didn't do the design suggestions that they made, which was incorporate some of the design from the cover onto those pages, because I was like, I just don't feel like going into Photoshop and fiddling with this, and then it's getting ugly and it looks and it's just frustrating the shit out of me. I don't have time for that. But my cover did change because, and this is something you should establish early on, and they kind of told us that, and I was like, I should have discovered that. So I came up with my design fairly early in terms of like the main picture that I was using was on Canva actually, and it was like one of the 3 designs that I had. It's so this design essentially is what I kept with, but it doesn't look just like this. It looks more tiled, because what ended up happening once we checked the resolution, it was too low for it to be blown up. And so if you blow up a picture that's very low resolution, you need at least 300 dpi, was it dots per inch, for it to not come up pixelated. The photos were 72. And so from Canva, I also had to figure out the origins of the photo so that I could use it if it was public domain, or not if it wasn't public domain, or have to buy the licensing to it. Luckily, it was in the public domain. I was able to like reverse image search it, and it came up from the public domain, and I found a website that I could download it from, like a museum website and stuff like that. But the thing was, it was a low resolution, so I had to completely give up that design element or modify, and I chose to modify it by shrinking it, or shrinking it and taking pieces of it and tiling it together so it just looks like almost like a wallpaper type effect. That's what I ended up doing with it, and it saved the project essentially. So even the cover that I've shown in previous videos is much different now than what I have. So there's that. So the editing process for that was pretty extensive, and then the one thing that annoyed me about this process, though, was getting last minute suggestions. And it was just because at some point, a little before spring break to be exact, I kind of started tuning out people's opinions about things. When it came to my feedback on poems, when it came back to design, it was just because I knew that this was going to have to go to print in like a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. And I just couldn't stomach dealing with like design stuff for much longer, or even edits for my poem, like major structural edits to the poem. Not like a period here, an M dash there, but major structural edits that like would really change the poem. I just couldn't deal with that. So I had started to tune that out. It was more of a time thing and a skill set gap thing more than like resistance to it. So about editing and resistance, for me, I wasn't that resistant to the suggestions. I think the most resistance that I had in terms of feedback and whether or not I took it was if I felt like your feedback was cognizant and aware of the context from which I was trying to create something, or the context I was trying to set up in the poem. If you didn't get the context, I really wasn't going to listen to the major edits that were going to take place, because I just felt like if you didn't get the context, you editing it down or telling me to take it out or whatever doesn't really make sense because you don't really get what I'm trying to do, right? So the structure, grammar, language part, that's a little bit different, picking that apart. But if like you're making edits and suggestions to change the entire way that this poem is going to read, that's when I was kind of more resistant to it. And not resistant to like, you can't make me change it. It was kind of like I would just listen to your suggestions and then just like, I would edit it to see how I liked it with those suggestions. And if I didn't like it, I just didn't care to like edit it to what that specification was. Now, I think the good feedback that I got was a lot more about like style, punctuation, things like that. That was the editing that I felt like the least resistant to. It was just, if you change the context of what I'm trying to say, I'm not here for it, because that's actually very integral to the poem and I can't have that, you know? So that was more like where I was resistant to. And again, like I noticed patterns when it comes to my writing. Like editing is like a little bit harder for me. Editing spelling, grammar, punctuation, apparently with the Zim dash, are harder for me. And then making it coherent is also an editing struggle that sometimes I may have. So if I'm not using the right words, if I'm not setting it up structurally the way that I want, kind of more of initial, then the edits that I get are also more like likely to lack the understanding of context and stuff like that. For me, I need to be as clear as possible with you like the second time, because by the time we get into edits, you need to get it, and we need to be on the same page essentially. So that's kind of like where I am with editing. But overall, I really like my editing process. I think my cohort was pretty laid back. We were kind of like, let's just get this done, and not in a defeated way. It's just kind of like, let's get this done. Let's sit down, let's process this and go from there. And there wasn't really any blow ups and stuff like that, because like, there was like a lot of stuff going on in previous cohorts. But like it wasn't like a lot of that. It was just more like, you know, either you kept it or you didn't. You know what I'm saying? Like you kept it or you didn't. And to me, I don't give a shit if you kept my suggestions or not. Like it's your book. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like you're gonna stand by your work, just like I'm gonna stand by my work. And so if you ain't taking my edits, who am I to say that this shit was wrong? I mean, I could read it and be like, I don't really rock with this, but it's your book at the end of the day. Because I don't think you rejecting my edits necessarily makes it a raggedy book. You know what I'm saying? Like, your shit is raggedy because you didn't take my suggestions. I don't really feel like that. So that's kind of how the thing. Now, if there's some glaring shit and you know good and damn well, then yeah. But for the most part, nah, we would show. Anyway, that's the editing process for my book, my proof. Hopefully I get it in the next few weeks, and then we can send this bitch to press, and then I have a book and I'll actually show y'all. All right, so thank you for watching. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.